All right, welcome back. Schenck versus the United States. All right, context for this case is, again, we're looking at how the Bill of Rights are continually being reinterpreted to balance the power of government and the civil liberties of individuals. All right, the facts of this case. So first of all, think about that year. This case was decided in 1919, and you have this case where Charles Schenck, a socialist, distributed leaflets arguing that the military draft violated the 13th Amendment's prohibition against involuntary servitude. So he was protesting the military draft for World War I. He was arrested for violating the Espionage Act by attempting to cause insubordination in the military and obstruct recruitment. All right, so he was passing out material opposing the draft and gets arrested for violating a law. He obviously feels like his freedom of speech rights have been violated. So the issue is, did Schenck's conviction under the Espionage Act for criticizing the draft violate his freedom of speech? Or is the government allowed to make such a law in time of war and it's not a violation? All right, so the holding might be a surprising one, I'm not sure, but it was a 9-0 unanimous decision that the Espionage Act did not violate the First Amendment and was an appropriate exercise of Congress's wartime authority. So that's an interesting, there's a lot here saying that that doesn't violate free speech where he was passing out leaflets. And there's also this idea of Congress's wartime authority, which we're going to discuss when we read some of these clips or quotes from the majority opinion. All right, so first of all, what is the constitutional principle used to support this decision? Well, it's obviously a First Amendment case, but they said that the First Amendment's free speech guarantee does not shield advocacy urging unlawful conduct. So they are making an exception to the First Amendment. If you remember, one of the arguments against having a Bill of Rights way back when was that by including this and mentioning it as something that Congress is involved in when it talks about Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, was that one day they might start interpreting that as, well, we can make exceptions to that. And here we have an exception to free speech when it advocates unlawful conduct. All right, now, how does the majority defend this decision, this rather dramatic limitation on free speech rights? First of all, they acknowledge that usually, many places in ordinary times, the defendants saying what they said would have been within their constitutional rights. So usually they could have passed out such a thing and they could have opposed the military draft. But the character of every act depends upon the circumstances in which it is done. In other words, the time and place of this particular speech is going to allow it to be limited. And I think the next slide will get to that claim a little bit more. So he says here the most famous line from this decision by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He writes, "The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic." So he's saying that free speech can obviously be limited, and he gives you that famous example of shouting fire in a theater as one limitation. So it says the question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create, and here's your key quote, "a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent." So he is here arguing that we can judge the words themselves that are being said and decide whether those words would create a clear and present danger. And if they would bring about a clear and present danger, Congress has a right to prevent not only that danger, but apparently also those words from being spoken or from being written and distributed. So this is a pretty significant ruling here, allowing the limitation of free speech based on whether it creates a clear and present danger. I want to point out to you, I think it's very important to note, that this clear and present danger is not the current interpretation of the First Amendment. This is 1919. It was overruled as quickly as 1925. It was changed slightly. It was updated again in 1969. So this is not the current interpretation. We can talk about that in other videos, but I just want you to know, you need to know what the interpretation was here, but it is not the current one. And then you have this whole point about it being wartime. When a nation is at war, many things that might be said in time of peace are such a hindrance to its effort that their utterance will not be endured so long as men fight, and that no court could regard them as protected by any constitutional right. So here is a more broadly based principle that during times of war, free speech can definitely be limited because of its negative potential effects against war efforts. So again, this decision is making a significant limitation on freedom of speech and expanding Congress's wartime powers, which, by the way, the Constitution makes no direct mention of. So this is kind of discovering wartime powers of Congress and, in turn, the presidency. All right, don't forget, subscribe. Hit that like button for me if this video helped you at all. This has been a La Money production.